Hello there. Well, I'm at Chatelherault, or however you pronounce it. It's a word I've had difficulties with in the past. I'm still having difficulties with it. This was once the summer house and hunting lodge of the Dukes of Hamilton, who at one time resided in Hamilton Palace, which used to be over there, at the end of a great avenue. After a video that I put online not that long ago about a walk in the Burnt Island area, I went up over the bin and ended the video in an abandoned village, Bin End. And that kind of sparked a little bit of an interest in other potential abandoned or lost villages in the country. And I found myself looking at a map of the Hamilton area. You know, this is in the Hamilton area. Hamilton Palace is in Hamilton. And I saw that there was an awful lot of coal mines around about Hamilton Palace. 20 odd that I could see, probably been more over the years. And quite often with coal mines, when they were built, whenever that would have been, mid towards the late 19th century, often there was miners' rows built at the same time as the coal mine. The miners who worked in the coal mine lived in the houses in the miners' row. But sometimes that miners' row extended to what you might term a village, quite a sizable sort of layout with streets and such like. And in this area you had collieries at Eddlewood and Cadzow, and both of those had sizable mining villages attached to them. I was actually going to go down there to have a look to see what might be left, but I decided just to look at Google Street View, and it told me that there appeared to be absolutely nothing left of the original mining villages. Of what's there now is just kind of look like maybe 1950s towards modern housing. I find it quite sad that these mining villages are completely gone. They've just completely erased them. These are stone-built structures, well-built streets of them, all gone. There's street names and things, you know. In Eddlewood and Cadzow just now, the street layout is slightly different. They've just completely, not just demolished the housing, they've done away with the street layout, created their own street layout. And in some cases where the street layout might be kind of similar in alignment to what was there previously, they've not even had the decency to retain the old street name. They've just obliterated any signs of these mining villages totally. And of course, obviously, looking at a map of this area, I've got Hamilton Palace sort of stuck out like a sore thumb in its day. And it was apparently demolished in the 1920s. Well, it was demolished in the 1920s, but apparently it was demolished because of coal workings underneath it that was in danger of causing subsidence or collapse of the structure, putting the whole palace and its structure in jeopardy. And then, of course, at the other side of Strathclyde Loch, you've got the lost village of Bothwellhaugh, another mining village that is now completely gone, and what's left of it is partially under Strathclyde Loch. But the mining, the colliery, but that's a hard word to say, isn't it? Colliery. The coal mine that was attached to Bothwellhaugh was called Hamilton Palace Colliery. And as it turns out, that coal mine, it was solely, it is linked to the demise of Hamilton Palace. Was there a good reason to pull down Hamilton Palace? That's where we're going with this video. Why was Hamilton Palace demolished? So come with me down the Great Avenue, and I'm looking at it now and I'm thinking, is that it? Because that's very, very wide. That is, without doubt, a Great Avenue. It almost looks like a football pitch wide. Let's go down that way in the direction of the site of Hamilton Palace. You can see the number of collieries around Hamilton in these Ordnance Survey maps dating to the 1890s. I've placed a red dot at each one. If we zoom in on Cadzow, you can see the miners' rows with street names. If we then look at a side-by-side image with an old map on the left and a modern satellite image on the right, you can see that the original layout of the mining village has gone completely, replaced with a new street layout lined with modern housing. One notable colliery in the area was the Bent Colliery, seen here just south of Hamilton. The owners played a significant role in the destruction of Hamilton Palace, as we'll hear later. Maps can also reveal the extent of the Great Avenue. This tree-lined feature ran from Chatelherault to the palace and beyond. You can see that it was called the Great Avenue between Chatelherault and the palace, and the Great North Avenue from the palace heading north. If you place a straight line in there, you can see just how well aligned all sections of the avenue were. A pretty astonishing feature. Well, behind me is the old bridge over the River Avon, unless I've got my rivers mixed up, which wouldn't be unusual. Initially, I mean, when you look at maps of the Great Avenue, it's very different to being here on the ground. It's only when you're up at Chatelherault Visitor Centre, looking down that Great Avenue, that you realise just how wide it is. It seems to be made actually of on either side of this huge, I mean, you must be talking over 100, 200 metres wide. You know, it's not an avenue that you would use to drive your motor vehicle or your horse down. But it seems to be made up of two kind of what you might term regular sized tree-lined avenues on either side of it, and these would obviously would have been used to come and go. And I had initially thought, well, when I looked at maps, I thought that avenue heads toward this river, and then, you know, I mean, when you look at a map and you take a ruler between the section that still exists today by Chatelherault and the section that still exists near the site of the palace, if you stick a ruler on that, they line up perfectly. But this bridge doesn't. And I thought, you know, if you've got a stately home and you've got the trouble of creating a great avenue, then you would also build a bridge. But when I had that idea, I didn't realise just how wide the Great Avenue was. So I initially thought, but there must be another bridge. They must have built another bridge. But I think that's probably nonsense, and this would have been the way. It just seems strange, you know, you've got a great avenue, then you kind of funnel into this little narrow cobbled bridge. There's a part of me thinks that they would have built another bridge, but as I say, it's probably nonsense. I also noticed when I was up at the hunting lodge, it's easier to say hunting lodge than Chatelherault. There's information boards and they call it the Grand Avenue. And you know, for a long time when I was doing this research, I was tempted to call it the Grand Avenue. But when you look at maps, I'll show you this any number of times during this video, it's called the Great Avenue. And I think that a section on the other side of the palace was called, I think it was called the North Great Avenue. It is grand, but as far as I can see, it was never called the Grand Avenue. Excuse me. So we'll carry on over this bridge towards the site of the palace, where there is, I think, the only other section of the Great Avenue that still exists. Well, I'm in Hamilton town proper now, as opposed to being in the outskirts, and I think this is the only other remaining part of the Great Avenue that once led to and from Hamilton Palace. Hamilton Palace used to sit just that sort of whitish building that you could see towards the end there. I think that's, I thought that maybe a sports centre or something, and it actually used to continue on beyond the palace. This section here is not just as great as the section by Chatelherault, because that was massively wide up there. I was really quite surprised how wide that was. As I say, I don't know, 200 metres wide or something. This is much narrower, but it has similar properties to the other section up there, and that this narrower middle bit is bordered on both sides by a tree-lined avenue. So you've got a tree-lined avenue on each side of this, which was the case with the other section. What we'll do now is we'll just head in the direction, we'll pass at the site of the palace. I don't think there's anything there other than a sports centre, and we'll maybe have a look at the mausoleum. It was the burial place of the Dukes of Hamilton. I think all their bodies were removed from it a while back because of flooding from the River Clyde, and they were deposited elsewhere. I think a cemetery at Bent. I think Bent's on the outskirts of Hamilton. Used to be a mining village, I think, and the actual fact that the coal pit there was owned by the Bent Colliery company, and they also ran the Hamilton Palace Colliery. I'm having real trouble with that word, which was near the abandoned mining village that we'll end the video with, just at the other end of Strathclyde Loch. And it was in fact that pit that, as I think I may have touched on earlier, was somehow connected to the demise of Hamilton Palace. As I say, there's just so much going on here. Everything is, I mean, the destruction of Hamilton Palace is not just as straightforward as it may initially seem, as I hope I'll explain to you towards the end of the video. And we may be looking at a real just an unnecessary destruction of a part of this country's architectural heritage. So let's have a look at the mausoleum first. Well, those birds and that water should tell you that we're now in Strathclyde Country Park and heading for our final destination, the lost village of Bothwellhaugh, a part of which lies submerged beneath the water. If we fade back and forth between an old map of the village and a modern map, you can see the sections of the village that now lie underwater. Well, I just came round Strathclyde Loch there to here. It was a longer walk than I thought, and it's not a pleasant walk. You know, the Strathclyde Country Park and the Strathclyde Loch were created, I think, in the mid-1970s. I don't know why they created it, unless perhaps to take folks' minds off the fact that they'd lost a lot of industry in the area and they had nothing else to do with themselves. I mean, there's nothing pleasant about wandering around the loch. You've got the constant drone of noise from the motorway on the other side of the water. What's that all about, you know? This is where the village of Bothwellhaugh used to be, and this cairn serves a number of purposes. It reminds people that the village was here, and another side of it that forms a memorial function in that it lists the men of Bothwellhaugh who died in the First and Second World War. Bothwellhaugh was a mining village, a mining community, one of a number around Hamilton. There's perhaps there you'd others like Eddlewood, coal mine, Cadzow, and villages grew up around them. There's absolutely nothing left of Bothwellhaugh. The coal pit that it was attached to and that it was created for, you know, all these houses were built to house miners in the coal mine. The village grew from, I think, the mid-1880s when the mine itself started up. The mine lasted until 1959 and the village itself hung on for dear life until 1965, at what point everybody was kind of eventually left and the place became abandoned, and part of the village is actually, or if there's anything left of it, lies under Strathclyde Loch. Sort of round about this area here. It was a sizable village full of streets. You only have to look at any photos, and I've not really been able to find any kind of photos, any decent photos, you know, but the ones that you can sort of partially see, it's a sizable village and community. Looks like a proper place, you know. It's not a ramshackle row of nissen huts or wooden huts just thrown up. Stone-built properties. The whole village had, in addition to sort of named streets, it had a church, mission hall, miners' club, even a cooperative shop, a billiard hall, football ground, bowling green. It had everything that the people who lived here would have wanted. The sole reason for this video is to question why Hamilton Palace was ever demolished. It was demolished in the 1920s. The reason apparently was that it was undermined by coal workings in the area. The building had become unstable, had to be pulled down. I don't believe a word of that. The 12th Duke of Hamilton got himself into financial difficulties. He had racked up debts of over £1 million. In the 1880s, he sold off the contents of Hamilton Palace. This was one of the grandest, this was the grandest stately home in the country, full of all sorts of treasures and artworks. He sold it all off, the entire contents, and in that same period, the 1880s, he gave instructions to the trustees who were looking after Hamilton Palace, because he no longer lived there. He gave them instructions to effectively do what they wanted with the palace. If they felt that the situation, if whatever might arise, would warrant demolition of the palace, so be it. He was quite happy with that. He was no longer living there at the time, as I say. And in 1915, the trustees of the palace gave permission to the owners of the coal mine here. As I say, this was a Hamilton Palace Colliery owned by the Bent Colliery company, who owned another coal pit in the Hamilton area. They gave them permission to expand seams and workings and allowed them to extend seams under Hamilton Palace. I mean, just think about that for a moment. Permission was given for coal workings to extend under Hamilton Palace. It's actually astonishing, it really is. Just a few years after that, in the 1920s, it said, oh, the palace has become unstable because of mine workings, we'll need to demolish it. I don't think so. I think they gave permission for the mine workings to be extended under the palace and used it as an excuse to pull the whole thing down. And, you know, it would be easy to criticise the 12th Duke of Hamilton, but you know, the poor man got himself into financial trouble. The bottom line was probably that it cost an absolute fortune for the upkeep of such huge buildings. He could no longer afford to keep Hamilton Palace. He wanted shot of it. But you know, at the end of the day, these men of wealth, they own sections of the country, they own huge, grand buildings. But in some cases, some of these structures and things are of such importance to the whole country that what happens to them should not be down to one man or his trustees. Hamilton Palace effectively belonged to Scotland. It was the finest, grandest stately home in the country, and for it to have been effectively, deliberately and for no good reason pulled down has to be the biggest architectural scandal this country has ever seen. The unwanted, the unnecessary demolition of a grand stately home that could have served this area in a far better way as far as attracting visitor numbers is concerned than that monstrosity of a loch sitting there that is partially covered over the village of Bothwellhaugh. Forgive me if I sound angry, but I am. I'm Eddie Burns. Take care. My explanation for why Hamilton Palace was demolished may not be just as accurate as it could be. The 12th Duke of Hamilton died in 1895. The palace remained in the hands of his appointed trustees. Whether there was or was not evidence of structural instability is neither here nor there, as coal workings below the palace had become so extensive that the foundations must have been at great risk. You couldn't simply wait to see if anything collapsed or fell down of its own accord. The building had to be pulled down. The 13th Duke apparently wanted to save the palace, but I suspect it was just too late, and the trustees were granted permission by the Court of Session to begin demolition, which took more or less all of the 1920s. Nevertheless, it was the 12th Duke who was ultimately responsible for the loss of the palace, and the biggest act of architectural vandalism this country has ever seen.